So let's say that you met somebody amazing, you fell in love, everything's great, you're going through a honeymoon phase, and then over time you realize that you became a mirror of your partner. Does that sound familiar? In today's episode, we're going to be discussing why you might lose yourself in romantic relationships and what you can do about it to reclaim your identity and maintain it as you explore interpersonal relationships. My name is Silvana and I am a Tantra teacher and the founder of the Venusian Academy, a space for the exploration of the divine feminine arts and Shakti Tantra. For thousands of years, we women have been conditioned to serve. It is expected of us to fit in certain role in society. Things are changing now, and this change is bringing a lot of confusion and it's also bringing a lot of polarization. It's really difficult to maintain the balance between traditional femininity, modern femininity, and fighting the patriarchy while at the same time remaining connected to our hearts. The problem with this is if we continue to blindly serve and blindly just dissolve ourselves into the identity of our partners, we run the risk of not really ever getting to know ourselves and knowing who we are. And it is very important for the individuation process of women to understand who they are at a deep level. So whenever we are in romantic relationships, what tends to happen is that there's this dissolution of the self, especially if you had childhood trauma and you did not have a healthy upbringing in those first developmental years. There's always going to be this tricky back and forth of who am I and who is the other person. This lack of boundaries can create a lot of problems because as we lose ourselves in the relationships, then the polarity is lost. Because at the beginning, it was like you were in the opposite side of this person, and then that polarity is what attracted you to one another. But over time, in this essence of dissolving your own boundaries of your identity and losing yourself, you end up actually depolarizing yourself because you become too similar to your partner, and eventually the relationships end. So why is it that this is more common for women to do than for men? Well, in order to answer this question, we have to understand our nature. And women in general, because they are mostly identified and connected with feminine energy, they are devotional beings naturally. And this natural devotion comes from a deep desire to unite back with source, to unite back with that oneness. The problem is that we are externalizing that source of creation that we want to reunite with. And the women that tend to do this more often are those that are carrying developmental wounds, most specifically a father wound. So the father wound is connected to our sense of identity. The mother wound is connected to our sense of self-worth. So of course, these are two very important pieces of the puzzle, but for this specific exploration, we're going to explore the father wound and the lack of identity, because this loss of self and loss of boundaries and the solution of boundaries that separate me from others, it's the most obvious byproduct of a father wound. So what are some of the steps that you can take to begin healing this father wound? Number one is learning to establish a sense of internal safety in yourself. Safety is complex. Safety, when we're talking about safety, we're talking about physical safety, emotional safety, financial safety. We have to also honor the animal part of us and the part of us that is trying to actualize and grow and spiritually evolve. So some of the most important steps that you can take to create that safety within yourself begins with the emotional safety. Emotional safety starts with you being safe for yourself, meaning that whenever these parts of you that maybe were not accepted when you were younger, or that were shamed by society or your family or schools or whoever, whenever those parts show up, you actually are able to meet them with presence and observe them without judgment. The moment that you start judging yourself and picking yourself apart, you are creating the opposite of emotional safety, because you're telling a part of you, an expression of you that is valid, that is divine, that is not allowed to exist. Therefore, this starts creating even more separation. And in the healing process, for me, healing is the act of becoming whole again, of picking back together all of these fragmented pieces and creating the wholeness of who we are all over again. In addition to the emotional safety, we have the physical safety. So a very important pattern that I've noticed in women that have a father wound is a very difficult time in establishing physical safety when it comes to their material wealth. There's always this deep struggle to feel worthy of establishing that sense of safety, and almost like an avoidance to it. It's like there's what we have to understand is like when there is a father wound, there's a part of us that didn't feel that, and that can manifest emotionally, but it can also manifest physically. And how it manifests physically is I am unable to take care of myself and I need somebody else to take care of myself, because if eventually someone takes care of me financially, there's the healing happening from that father wound, because I am being taken care of by a masculine presence externalized from myself. So obviously this isn't ideal, because we are here on this journey to pick ourselves back together, to recreate the canvas of who we are. So it is very important to learn how to establish that safety. And this is a deep process. This is something that almost every single client that I've had in the past that has a father wound, including myself, we all have struggled with this, with how do I create this financial stability in my life? And it's not that we are unable to do the things that create the stability, or that we are lazy, or no. This is feeling worthy of doing that for ourselves by first allowing ourselves to feel the heartbreak for the fact that we didn't have that in the past, that wasn't present. But feeling worthy enough by healing the mother wound, feeling worthy enough to create that for myself, to become that paternal figure that I didn't have in the past. That's why this process is so deep, and it's one of the most difficult parts of individuation whenever we are talking about healing the father wound. Is making sure that financial and physical safety is established. And it doesn't mean that you have to be in a perfect state, but at the very least there's this active participation in creating that for yourself, regardless of who is in your life. Second piece of the puzzle to begin healing the father wound is understanding boundaries. There's a lot of conversations about what boundaries are, how to place them, what is the proper way of doing them. But at the core, boundaries is the ability to be able to identify what is them versus what is me. So it's not about like what I allow and not allow. This is like the third level of boundaries, but the foundational level of boundaries is to know like what is me and what is the other. Because the primary role of a boundary is to create containment. And what are we containing? Our sense of identity. So whenever I understand what is me and what's the other, then, only then, I can identify what is acceptable for me and what is not acceptable for me. You see, it's very important to first have clarity around who I am and what do I accept in my field. There is like, if we try to put boundaries before that process is acknowledged, before we go through this identification of what's me and then what is it that I allow, what is acceptable for me, it's going to be very chaotic to put boundaries, because then you're gonna realize, wait, did I really need to put a boundary there? Why? So it gets wobbly. So this wobbly energy, that's the symptom of having an unprocessed father wound. And you can carry a father wound even if you had a paternal figure in your life. If you didn't have that sense of development over my identity and my sense of safety and the differentiation of like who's me and who is my family and who's my environment, if that wasn't properly set up, you are still suffering from the consequences of having a father wound. Third point to analyze whenever we are looking at ourselves in the context of I need to heal my father wound is to get very clear. So this is the context of like love versus light, the feminine versus the masculine, the feminine being the love polarity and the masculine being the light polarity. So as light illuminates, light identifies, light observes. So we need to learn to get clarity within ourselves. And whenever it comes to the context of romantic relationships, it's understanding what is it that I am trying to get out of a romantic relationship. Asking ourselves this question before we even begin that exploration, it's so important, because you get to see whether you're trying to use a relationship as a band-aid from a wound, or whether you're in a place where you are ready to enter into a relationship because you've hit your your end of the road, like the end of the road in the amount of work that you can do on your own. Usually this looks like, like you might feel completely healed and whole and untriggerable. I don't know if that's a word, but we're gonna, hopefully you understand, like nobody's able to trigger you. If you get to the point where you're like, oh, I'm healed because nobody can trigger me, then most likely it's time to start entering into the exploration of like, well, maybe I'll enter into a relationship, because there's only so much work that we can do on ourselves. There is a piece of the puzzle that needs to happen in relationships. And because our wounding happens in relationships, a lot of our healing is also going to happen there. And when I say healing, I don't mean that you're like this broken thing that needs somebody to heal. I mean that being in relationship, in intimate relationship with somebody else, is going to help you dive deeper into your own sense of self, because you become deeply intimate with somebody else. And once deeper parts of yourself get seen, then you get to see more of yourself, because you'll notice your reactions. So having clarity around what is it that I am looking to get out of relationships will reveal a lot about where you're at in the process right now. A key piece of the puzzle here is to understand what's your primary identity. Who are you at your core, and how do you stay connected with this energy? So in my course, Venusian Woman, the second pillar out of the 3 pillars is dedicated exclusively at the father wound. And what we explore there is how to reclaim that sense of identity and ground in a safe identity. Why do we need to do this? Because if you enter into a relationship without knowing who you are, that's when you become your partner. Because it is natural for women, especially women that feel deeply connected to their feminine energy, to enter into the devotional space of, because I'm devoted to this relationship, I kind of fit into the mold that the relationship is providing. And like I said at the beginning, that's what kills polarity and attraction and magnetism and the passion altogether. So if I know who I am, whenever I notice that I'm getting lost, that my boundaries are getting blurry, or that I'm only finding my sense of contentment or purpose through my relationship, then it's an opportunity for me to return to that primary identity that I established for myself. So if you haven't done this work and you're very confused about what is your primary identity, I recommend you check out Venusian Woman, second pillar. It's all about the father wound, safety, and our sense of identity. Now, let's say that you are already in a relationship and you're like, well, how do I even start working on this if I'm already feeling like I'm like lost in the container that my partner provided for the both of us? Well, in that case, it's very important to connect with your innocence, with your inner child. I don't use the word like inner child that much as I use the word innocence, because for me, that kind of helps me tap into that part of myself better. I don't know why. Maybe it doesn't, but it's the same thing. Whenever I say inner child versus innocence, I'm talking about the same part of ourselves. So how can I connect to that part of myself? Or do I even feel connected to that part of myself? And am I honoring that part of me? Am I honoring my innocence? It's so easy to put the inner child in a box and to completely ignore it. Especially when we had to do that growing up. It's the easiest thing to betray yourself and abandon yourself. So part of the practice of doing this work of, as women, becoming individuated and stepping out of this role of like the victim and the role of the young naive woman, the frozen princess, into the individuation, into womanhood, is to rescue for yourself that part of you and connect with it. And it's like, that's the most important relationship in your life. Throughout your entire life is going to be your relationship to your inner child. Whether you are a mother, whether you're a grandmother, whether you don't have kids, whether you only have dogs and cats, like whatever role you grow into your life, your most important relationship is the one with your inner child. That's the compass. That's how we remain connected to our inner God, our inner self, because that is the doorway to the purity of our soul. It's that innocence. So if you're a person that tends to self-abandon, it's asking yourself, how can I stop myself from self-abandoning? And how can I create practices that help me not abandon myself and that help me stay connected with this innocent part of yourself? Just like with an external relationship, we work on creating time, one-on-one time with our partners, one-on-one time with our friends, and we take the time to nourish relationships and get to know somebody. We have to do the same thing with our own innocence and our inner child. How do I get to know my inner child at a deeper level? Because it's infinitely deep. And how can I create spaces in my life to bring that part of myself to the core, to really spend time just with me? It's like my awareness with my inner child, with my innocence. We don't do that, like life doesn't really nurture this type of work. So we have to create those spaces in our life, regardless of whatever responsibilities we have. It's like that's the most important spiritual practice. If you put inner child connection with innocence under the same category of spiritual practices, and you take it as something that you do daily, you're going to begin repairing that deep wounding that happens whenever we're born on this planet. Like, this is a traumatizing place for the most of us. I have not yet met the person that, had the perfect whole upbringing, because even if we had a very protective family, there's wounding that happens externally in the world through our peers, through school, and just the state of the world. I mean, we don't really have to go that far to look at the amount of wounding that our planet is really playing out still to this day, and who knows how much longer we're going to be doing this. So that's the importance of, like, I'm taking responsibility for this, and I am the one that's going to set that container for me to reconnect with my innocence. A key point that I want to give you here is, before you do this work, think about and journal, or just question yourself, how would you know that you're abandoning yourself? How does that even feel like, and how does that look like? If you don't know that, you won't be able to identify it when you're in it. This is the importance of, like, really spending time with ourselves to really analyze, like, how is it that we show up when we are in triggers and whenever we are in certain energies. Equally important is, how would I know? What are my key indicators letting me know that I'm in the process of self-abandoning, or that I am dropping my identity altogether? So that's a very personal question. It's gonna vary for all of us. But asking ourselves that and writing it down is going to help during those confusing moments where we don't even know what's happening. Whenever there's confusion, that's when you go back to all of that work that you did when you were clear-headed, when you are, like, having fun and you're connected to yourself. That's when you want to do this type of work, not when you're in, like, the middle of the confusion, because you're in confusion and you have to also honor the amount of energy and emotions that are moving during those times. So I highly recommend that if you're feeling good, you're in a good space with yourself, then learn to identify what will be your key indicators, your own personal red flags, that you are stepping into self-abandonment. What would you get out of all this work? Well, if you work on the father wound, you will notice that you no longer lose yourself in romantic relationships, and this will create healthier relationships. At the superficial level, it will maintain the polarity, it will maintain the mystery, it will maintain this sense of seduction and attraction with your partner, because having that clear sense of identity encompasses all of your energy. And if it's encompassed, it's like I am a unit and there is this other unit that is around. It doesn't blur into, like, we are just one. Because if we're just one, then where is the polarity? Romantic relationships, sexuality, they work on a polar opposite. You have to have a masculine and a feminine polarity. Regardless of genders, those two have to exist for distraction to exist. So the way that you maintain that is by having that clear sense of identity and that separation. Because once there is separation, these two forces can unite in those separated identities. I know it's like a little paradox, but that's what you get out of this. Just healthier ways of relating with everybody around you, not only in relationships, but also in your friendships, at work, in any kind of interpersonal relationships. So I hope that this gave you a few points to begin working on that father wound, or at the very least exploring it. And if you want to dive deeper into this work, then make sure you check out Venusian Woman. You can find the link in the description below. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, please like it. It really helps the channel, and I will see you guys next time.